You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Gale.
Hello and welcome to Gems in Comms podcast series special, brought to you by 9to5workrebels.com and in association with Hanson Search, the award-winning international exec search recruitment consultancy. My name is Ebony Gale and I'm your host today, and I am super happy and delighted to be introducing you to one of my colleagues, Fiona Chow, who is an amazing comms expert. She actually is a founder of Goadi consultancy. She's also a founder and CEO of Ugly Babies, and she does a whole host of other wonderful things. So welcome, Fiona.
Thank you so much for having me. Really nice to speak to you.
Welcome. It is great to speak to you. So Fiona and I met a while ago through the Independence Network, through CIPR. So of course we are sort of comms.
We met in a bar.
In a bar, as we do. So the whole idea of this whole series special that I'm doing is really to kind of highlight and celebrate, our Black, ethnic minorities, Asians, those who are non-white, basically within the comms industry, because there's a whole lot of talk going on about PR and comms being 92% white, which we know is, the case. But this is all about, giving others their flowers, those that don't always get to be given their flowers or get to shine as much as we should like them to shine. Hence why it's called Gems in Comms. These are gems. Maybe some are undiscovered for some are not.
Yeah.
For me, this is not undiscovered. This is Fiona. She is definitely a known gem from where she is from. Okay. So do tell me about yourself, Fiona. Come and tell everyone about your experience.
Well, it's really hard to sort of summarize in a few sentences because I really am a kind of like Heinz PR person. I've got so many different roles going on, including actually hosting a podcast of my own, which is all about Web3 and crypto. Again, trying to kind of bring to the fore interesting projects, minorities, etc. So being interviewed on another podcast is quite meta, really. And as you mentioned, there's Goadi, which is my sort of day-to-day consultancy business. Ugly Babies, which is an venture I set up last year, which is looking more at kind of how we help startups to Series B kind of get to the next step, whether that's funding, exits, market entry, etc. And I also work with the fabulous team at Raptor PR, which is a specialist in video games, metaverse, ad tech, etc. So really, I'm sort of jack of all trades, really.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So tell me, how long have you been in the industry?
I have been in 20 years now. Amazing. You actually get less for murder, I've realized.
I think you do. I really think you do. So is it like a case of you've always enjoyed being in comms? Like, what attracts you to the industry?
I think I started off always wanting to go into journalism. And I really sort of was quite focused on that all throughout my life and sort of geared up education towards that. So my degree was actually politics and parliamentary studies. And that was wholly because it was a 4-year course. And the third year we got to do work experience in the US Senate and then in Parliament. And then me being me, of course, sort of went laterally and ended up working in the press office for a US senator. Who on the first day that I arrived for work was accused of sexual harassment by his ex-chief of staff. So that story broke on the first day I strolled into the office to work in the press office. So it was like, hi, welcome, don't answer the phone.
Immediate firefighting.
Immediate firefight. And then from there, for my UK placement, I worked with Martin Bell, who was at the time the only independent MP in Parliament. He's the ex-journalist. He was MP for the Tatton constituency, which is where my school was. So I did a month with him, and then I did the final kind of 5 months with the first ever London mayoral campaign for the Lib Dems, again in the press office. So I kind of got to see that I was doing more of the stuff I really loved in journalism, particularly the writing, but you got paid a lot more in PR. so I ended up kind of choosing PR as the route to go down, and kind of have been there ever since.
Interesting though, because you started out in politics, which I didn't realize, because obviously I know you from working more in the sort of tech space, blockchain, tech space. That's how I've met you. So it's really interesting to hear that you came from sort of almost the parliamentary side to the public. Why didn't you go down public affairs? Was that not really something that interested you at the time?
I felt like, because I was really passionate about politics when I was younger. I feel less so now just because of kind of how the environment's moved. But I felt that my concern was if I worked in public affairs, worked in politics as my job, I would kind of lose my passion for it overall, because it becomes the kind of day-to-day grind, rather than kind of being at that top end philosophical side, which is what we enjoyed. I was a student, basically sitting in a pub and chatting about putting the world to rights. That was my interest in politics.
With your big beer, right? Just getting really into it.
Exactly, the shouty, pointy fingers stuff of politics.
Oh, that's so funny. So that's interesting, though. So really, you went from journalism into realizing you could get paid much more in PR, and then obviously finding your way of where you wanted to go, which is always really interesting. Anyway,
I mean, finding your way is kind of that's a very polite way of putting it. I'd call it sort of 20 years of stumbling, and just fortunately kind of landing on my feet. But to say there was the grand plan in my sort of teens has been fully realized, as it would be a lie.
Well, fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. So I wanted to get more into some of your kind of lived experiences in terms of being, someone from an ethnic minority background, working in this industry. One of the questions that I always like to ask is, when did you first become aware of your ethnicity? So it might sound crazy to people who are listening, but literally when you're in your own home, you're with your family, so you're just comfortable. For me, my first time was probably heading off to secondary school and hearing like some really scary stories about what were called back then Chelsea Smilers, who were known to go and if you were of an ethnic minority, they were known to apparently take a knife and kind of cut a smile across your face. And I remember hearing about that and being quite petrified going to school and being thinking, well, what is this all about, kind of thing. So
that's not my experience. I mean, my experience is nobody fucks with the Chinese. I was saying this in the call the other day. It's like we never get our tourists never get kidnapped and held to ransom.
No. That's so funny.
Not to say it's a wholly positive, but I think, there's your lived experience. I've always been conscious of being Chinese and being raised in a Chinese family and having, certain expectations and roles. I think in the kind of work context, I honestly think probably the first time I really realised it was when I was first looking at applying for jobs post-university. And there was a bit of a fashion, and there still is, and it always used to trigger me, the sentence at the bottom of the job ad, which was, we actively welcome applications from those of minorities, etc., etc. And I found myself, having worked really hard to get to university, so slightly offended by that. It's like the positive discrimination actually made me quite uncomfortable.
Right.
And I accept I'm coming to that probably from a different lived experience of discrimination than other people of colour. But for me, it's sort of my naive 21-year-old, I was like, but I would feel uncomfortable that I have somehow jumped the queue because of aspects that are out of my control, when there's all these things I can control, i.e. my work ethic, my work experience, my degree, that I felt, did they get overlooked? I would always be, and there's a bit of that kind of imposter syndrome. It's like, am I here because I've ticked all these boxes, or because I've done all these things? And so the first few years of my life career was always about kind of almost feeling to justify my position because of that. Yeah.
No, I can understand that. It's interesting as well the way you look at it, because I feel like, so in the workplace, so that was more university, right? So did it hit you at any point in the workplace where you felt like, oh, this is really feels weird?
Not so much weird. I've always been aware that I've been slightly different, and I think that's because my experience largely was in smaller agencies. So my first agency, I was the only junior person, and it was a very white middle class agency. It was former kind of newspaper editors heading it up, ex-civil servants, the former manager of the Beatles. So a triumvirate of sort of old grey men who've been in the industry for decades and came from really old school practices. So my learning experience there was quite, let's say, vintage compared to people that maybe were in more progressive or bigger agencies where there's more experiences to lean from. So it was sort of in a bit of a cocoon there. And I look back now and I'm like, some of the things that were said or expected, I think more as a female than as a person of colour. I talk to junior people now, I'm like, God, I would never get away with this
With
now.
Yeah. It's going to be completely different, I can imagine, especially in a smaller agency, you know, because everyone has their own little cultures, don't they? So some things which are, you know, like wow to other people are, you know, normal.
I mean, some bits are great. I remember I was talking to one of the juniors at an agency I work with about how I got my first pay rise, sorry, so I sound American there, and you know, the chairman was great, but he sort of had no understanding of what it was to be a 20-something in London. You know, we walked past a estate agent in Maida Vale after a business meeting. He'd say, maybe you should buy here, it's quite cheap, like £250,000 a flat. And I was like,
in Maida Vale,
I actually said to him,
really cheap.
do you know how much you pay me? Which at the time was £17,000 a year. So like times that by 4, it's still probably a quarter of a flat. And he sort of offhandedly mumbled things like, oh, we must look at that. And they never looked at that because he didn't have any, you know, that sort of structure he didn't have because it's a big agency. So I literally had to, after unsuccessfully trying to get him to sit down and talk to me about it, get him in a headlock outside the boardroom and drag him in to have the conversation. And I say that to Gina now, they look at me like, and I'm like, yeah, that is not the way to do it. I'm just saying that's how I do it.
It's just what happened to me, but it's not the way to do it. That is so funny. So I suppose to lead on to that, I suppose my question would be like, have you ever felt that, you know, race or ethnicity has held you back in your career at any point in time?
I honestly would say no. I haven't felt it. I'm sure they probably have, and haven't been as aware of it. And I think what I've done though is try to take control of it. I think especially as I get older and I have experience, I can sort of lean into some of the stereotypes that are positive. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, that as somebody who's Chinese, I think my experience of discrimination or these difference is probably very different to somebody who comes from like an Afro-Caribbean background.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Chelsea Smilers, not in my vernacular.
Not in vernacular, exactly. And also, I think it's interesting because as you speak about ethnic minorities, because the saying is that if you're Chinese, they're the more, you know, what's the word? Like amenable and more, they're like the... What's the word I'm looking
submissive.
For? Not even submissive. You can say that, but I'm looking at it from the rhetoric that I hear and see a lot, particularly on social media and, you know, just talking to people. It's interesting because people feel like in ethnic minorities that you've got Asians or Chinese, I don't say Asian because I feel like just it's a whole, you know, takes it somewhere else. But Chinese people are looked at particularly as like the favourable ethnic minorities.
Yeah, and I think similar to like some of my Indian colleagues, you know, we're good at maths. You know, we're very diligent. We work, but then you know, on the other side, you have the kind of like CCQ stereotype, which is the highly sexualized Asian, etc. Which I think I definitely saw glimpses of, especially when I was younger. I mean, but it takes somebody probably less, if they're smart, less than 30 seconds to realize that doesn't fly with me. And I think that kind of having that sense of self, and I think having a strong kind of family background, work ethic, and it's kind of you can do anything was will like helped me to sort of approach that positively. I think now I've got older, especially now I'm a mum, I definitely lean into the tiger mum aspect and sort of take that role in my various agencies or various roles, but I think with some like authenticity as well, because that's what I am.
Well, fair enough. Well, then I suppose from your perspective, you might not. I was going to ask you if you've ever experienced any racism in the workplace or witnessed it and how it was handled.
I think directly myself, I've been fortunate not to have had that. I wonder sometimes whether some of the other less positive experiences I've had, particularly around sort of pregnancy and maternity discrimination, have somehow been bundled in with race as well. So I think it's more complex than a black or white situation. I think it's all environmental. It's really nuanced, etc. I mean, in terms of like, I definitely witnessed, particularly in one of my earlier agencies, is my old school bosses, problematic language. Both about being female and also being of colour, and also background as well. I remember we were trying to recruit for another junior person, and the literal first stage was anybody who was female, because they wanted a guy. The female pile was just like immediately reject. you know, and there were some really creative examples. Just glimpsed that. I was like, it's just ridiculous.
Did you get to push back on that, or was you younger at the time, so didn't get to push back on it?
It wasn't that I couldn't have. I just felt like, because it was very much that I didn't have any other experiences to compare it to. I think it was just a kind of, my expectation of going into a job was get stuck in there and get on with the job. And if you don't like it, find another one somewhere else. And I loved my job, and I loved my clients, you know, and I actually loved the, you know, old grey guys I worked for, because I put him in a headlock.
That's so funny. You actually put them in a physical headlock. So I'm like, well, there you go. You've got a different kind of rapport going on there. So we're saying you should do that out there, any listeners. Okay, we're not saying put anybody in anything. Okay?
No, but I mean, he was like an old, you know, he was a newspaper editor, tabloid news editor in the sort of 80s. So I think that could have told you all about the context of it.
Absolutely.
But also a guy who would, like, surprisingly sometimes really get out to bat for me. Like, it was a time that a client was really awful to me on the phone for no real reason.
Right.
And my boss calls his boss, who calls that guy's boss, who comes down and bollocks him in front of the whole newsroom. And I'm like, you know, that's
because you felt like they had your back. So that's good. So you felt more than anything, you didn't have any major experiences, you'd say, no major experiences of race, and more like just discrimination, like you said. So we're being put to the side. But you did say there was some language.
That's more dangerous, though, I think, because I think it's easy to call out overt racism. Like, almost if they use like inappropriate language, you can call that as a specific example. I think the more dangerous is the kind of insidious discrimination or attitudes, which I think I'm hoping as a society we're getting better at spotting. I think I'm not sure what the kind of levers for changing it quickly are yet. I don't think
there is a possibility of changing anything quickly. I think it takes time to get that change, but it just depends on who's the organisation and who's driving it and things like that. Because I feel like it depends on, as a society, you know, we can't control how it moves forward, but we can, you know, be the change you want to see.
Yeah, and I think
move forward in that sense.
Blind recruitment is, you know, a really good example of. So, you know, my friends that were at Dynamo PR, which is now part of Clarity, were quite kind of innovative in terms of blind recruitment. So they didn't have kind of any personal details on CVs. I think at Hoxby, which I haven't mentioned, Hoxby, the Hoxby community, which we were both part of.
Yeah.
Again, that's very much based on kind of your output and your skills rather than where you live, what you do, what your circumstances are. So I think the more that those structures become normalized, or the norm, the kind of more equal playing field we start from, at least.
Yeah, I think it helps. I mean, you've got some who are in favour of blind recruiting, you've got those who are not. I mean, there's lots of discussions around this whole topic, and I feel like it is about it coming from the top. And I feel like there's a lot to be done about people and their own attitudes, because a lot of the cases are, you know, you've got myself or someone, or a person of colour who turns up to work, they're turning up to do their job. But we can't control what thoughts you have in your mind and what stereotypes you have that you can then go and place on somebody else because of you've watched the show and you think they fall into that category, you know. So there's lots of self-development and there's lots of challenges within that itself. So I find it always interesting speaking to other people about whether they've witnessed racism at work or they've experienced it, or whether there's been a case maybe where there's a time when you've had to speak up or self-advocate. You know, I think it's really interesting. I also like to touch on code switching. I don't know if you do it as much, but I feel like there's a thing called code switching. Yeah. So, you know, you're at home, you're relaxed, you're talking normally, or, you know, you might be with your family, you're very comfortable, but then you go into work and you might, you know, put on a different hat, I should say. Yeah. So we call it code switching. So, for example, you know, at home or when I'm with my family, you know, my lingo might be slightly different. I'm going to be more kind of comfortable going into the workplace. Then I do put on more of a, prim and proper approach, so to speak.
Really interesting. I think more so with being client facing, there was the kind of need to present yourself in a more professional way, you know. But hopefully, I mean, I have the beauty of kind of picking and choosing my own clients, you know, and the ones that I work best with, that code switch very, very quickly breaks down.
Okay.
So, you know, I've joked to my clients that you're not a proper client of mine, so I threaten to kill you. I think there's a bit of a theme here.
Headlocks. I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, if I've not sworn at you or threatened to kill you, then you're not really a client. I think that's part of the personal brand. I think, you know, you come to me for, you know, not only comm strategy, but also a healthy dose of fear.
Which is good for the tech world, people, actually. Keep them in line, absolutely. I've worked with techie people.
Startup founders need that kind of like tiger mum, probably more than a lot of other sectors might do.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds to me like you kind of do. I suppose the question around the code switching is whether you lead with your authentic voice in the workplace, whether you can. Because I feel like when you work for yourself, I feel like you can lead with your own authentic voice. Like you said, you bring your own tiger mum attitude. Like for me, I've had clients say to me, I'm going to be too much fun to work with, because I like to have fun when I'm working, you know. So but I feel like I can be my authentic self with my own umbrella, not necessarily in the corporate world. I didn't necessarily feel like that in the corporate world, though.
I think authenticity is absolutely key when you're, especially if you're freelancing, because more than any place, they're buying into you.
Absolutely.
And you has to be a holistic you. So I talk a lot with like my friend Helen Campbell, who wrote a great book on freelancing, about people like to talk about work-life balance, and I prefer to think about work-life blend.
Okay.
So if I'm at work, people are going to know that I'm a mum and I have to drop a call at 3:30 to get to the school run, or you know, when I'm feeling terrible because my son came home with 8 out of 20 in the maths test, and this is just outraged me, and I'm now going to spend the next few days grilling him on maths until he gets to an acceptable standard. And I think being able to bring those parts of you that might have been other in previous generations is really key to kind of people being able to form a relationship with you on a professional level that has roots. And I think roots are in the personal. People buy people in this business.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with that. Absolutely. And moving more into, I suppose, the kind of color bias. Do you become aware? When did you become aware of the kind of color bias in PR and comms? Because you know what I see a lot of is, sorry to cut you, just particularly in agency world, I hear a lot about, you know, maybe people of colour not always being sent out to do the pitching, or, you know, being placed strategically sometimes. So just wanted to get your opinion on that.
I think it's always been a bit of an undercurrent that was unspoken. And I wasn't sure, and again, about this nuance. Like, I wasn't sure when I was younger whether it's because I was the youngest person in the room that I'd be expected to serve the tea and coffee, or is that because I'm the girl, you know, or is it because I'm I'm the Chinese girl and they think of me as the sort of CCQ hostess role, etc. And I think I made the decision early on that I could spend my entire life kind of navel gazing about, you know, trying to see the nuance, or just get on with what I'm doing. But I certainly know that my friends from like have had other experiences where they have felt very much singled out negatively because of their background. You know, if their accent doesn't fit, if you know, they are not perceived to be of this particular club, etc. You know, and it's I sort of viewed it as a bit of like, a little bit through, like I was seeing it a little bit through a window rather than it being my personal experience.
You kind of observing it, like, rather than kind of living it. Fair enough. And what's your thoughts on allyship, and what does it mean for you?
Allyship,
yeah. Allyship.
I think allyship, and it goes back to authenticity. And so, you know, and I don't want to be like, you know, one of those hand-painted signs you see in kitchens, like of being the change you want to see. But I think allyship is about building, it's about network, right? So building that network or that family around you, be that work or friends or professional, that reflect the best of you, what you see in yourself, and the best of what you want to see in the world. And I think making sure that you have that kind of perspective, especially when you work on your own a lot, I think that's where I see allyship. That's why it's been really powerful for me, is like quite often I don't have somebody I feel like I can't bounce something off myself all the time. So I'll bring somebody that's either in the same industry or sometimes a completely different industry to get a perspective on what I'm thinking. Like, am I mad to think this? Or what would you do in this situation? Or like, am I trying too hard to win this client over, or should I just dump them? So that's where you find your kind of tribe. And I think building that is really important, and especially because now we're in this sort of hybrid work world. Like, I'm working from home most of the time, but I'm still trying to go work at my co-work just to see other human adults now and again. There's, you know, communities like Hoxby, there's my like Raptor that I primarily am on Discord all day with. So and then there's sort of the social personal networks as well, and how they feed into that. I think building all of that up into like an ecosystem that supports you and lifts you up is really important.
Really important. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what would you say you found your most challenging on your journey so far?
I think definitely, I think my turning point was just starting to just stop worrying about work-life balance as a mum and think about work-life blend. And with that, the kind of bringing the authentic self into every aspect of your life, whether that's work or personal, because it's tiring to have a front, to have a different face. So I'd rather just have the one. Sometimes it has makeup if I'm feeling jazzy. Most of the time it's sat here with my giant scarf and jumper because it's freezing in a hot water bottle. And I think that's getting comfortable with that, you know, and fine, it is a real challenge.
It is.
And I think everybody has to go through that. I mean, I think I've done it relatively early. Like, you know, I certainly compare I'm mid-40s now, but here compared to when I was in my mid-20s, and the kind of like sense of contentment in self I have now versus the 20s when it's a bit of a rat race. You're worrying about tiny things that actually I can't even remember now, you know, 20 years on, that were really important at the time. I think that's that. And I think being really, and again tied to the authenticity message, being really firm and being able to do that sort of sniff test early with clients. So rather than sort of chase the supposed dollar signs or money signs, it's like, this person kind of, or this business resonate with what I want to do, what I'm good at, and where I can feel happiest, because that is where I will deliver the best. And I think, and getting a real understanding of that, and what are the kind of like, at what point is it they're just going to be a pain to work with, you should walk away, versus they're going to be a bit of a pain to work with, so let's apply a nuisance premium, but there's a way forward. I think understanding that grey area, that Venn diagram,
I think that's so important, especially for someone like, well, for people like us who work by ourselves, and we work, you know, we might collaborate here and there, but it is that knowing that you can have that autonomy of knowing whether it's good to work with these people, if it will work for you, and knowing that actually, for me, you know, I always say that it's about the enjoyment, and, you know, working with clients that I actually respect, and, you know, I care about what they do. You know, I'm not necessarily into the kind of the fluffy PR, but I like stuff that's, for me, has a bit of meaning, and I feel like, you know, I can add some sort of worth there. But also, like you said, you know, essentially it's really important to make sure that the client, you know, is compatible as well, and that you can work with them, and that they are receptive to, you know, the, you know, managing expectations that we often have to do. So, you know, it's interesting. And you do get older and you do realize that actually this is what's really important. It's not just about chasing the bag, you know, and just getting the money. It's like, you know, you can get the money, but now you're happy with what you're doing.
And I think the other benefit of having like a big network, a healthy network, is if something's not right for me, I generally like to kind of point them in the direction of someone or somewhere that might be a better fit
for them. Absolutely.
You know, I'm a big believer sort of being a radiator and not a drain, as my old boss Angie Moxham used to say. And you know, a brilliant example is with Raptor that I'm doing some work with now. You know, that I've known Rana for probably nearly 20 years, following each other around various agencies around London, you know, periodically. But I got approached by a client last year, fantastic client, but I said to the client, I think you need an agency, not a freelancer. This is bigger than you realise. Introduced them to Raptor and to another agency of mine just to have a conversation. They've ended up signing a long-term retainer with Raptor, and they're, you know, a perfect client for them. And Rana got in touch with me in, I think, January, and said, "Oh, could we have a chat? Because I'm looking at sort of senior support. I need some help with the strategy side as the agency is growing." So, you know, that's been returned to me in spades.
To you, absolutely, that's
which
amazing.
Is great. So, you know, I think having that mindset, and like, I could have taken the client, it would have been good money, but I knew that I would be working myself into the ground and probably couldn't deliver at the level they needed. That agency structure, they needed that ongoing press office. They needed people bashing the phones, like, and they've got fantastic results. So I didn't.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's the best result possible. Is like I gave them to somebody that would look after them, and with my seal of approval. So
that's
I
brilliant.
think
that's nice.
Yeah,
that was quite nice. It's a nice way to handle it as well, and it also shows that you're not being selfish or about it's like karma, isn't it? You put it out there, it will come back to you, and I believe in that. Absolutely. So I want to move into proudest moments. So obviously it's all about celebrating what you do. So tell us about your proudest moments. Can be work, can be personal. It's up to you. Can be both.
Proudest moment. I think well, up there. So my first proper freelance client when I came back to work was actually an old client of mine. I've worked with I think 12 years now. He's a startup serial entrepreneur called Nick Oliver, and he approached me when I was just come back from maternity leave with his, hadn't heard from him in probably 18 months, and get a Facebook message at 11:30 at night with a hey, and I'm like, hello Nick, what do you want? And he said, I've got this new venture, can I talk to you about it? And he showed me what was then 9 slides in a deck, and I went, yeah, you clever little bugger. It was this initial concept for a personal data marketplace called people.io. And he asked me to help with the PR. And so this is really my first proper foray back into PR after maternity leave and being made redundant and having quite a sort of bruising personal time as a result of that. And it just flew as a story. I mean, it was like all over the BBC, the FT, all these like tier 1 titles. And I just got that buzz back again.
Oh, amazing.
And he, he was audited. He was a Founders Factory NASDAQ rising star. So as a result, was invited to New York to ring the closing bell at NASDAQ. So off went to New York in January, and I stood there in the studio with probably about 8 of us, supposed to fill 40, but we come from the UK, so 8. Yeah. And it was like I'm super proud of him, and I'm super proud of us. And I was like, I remember saying to him as we kind of went in for like a hug, like look how far we've come.
Amazing.
I really celebrated that moment. I think that's definitely a high point of my professional career. And then obviously all my personal ones are related to my son not getting A + 20 in maths test. When he gets 100% in Chinese exams. I think there's lots of little moments of pride that I try to find, I think, rather than one big kind of epic.
But that's a lovely one, though, the one you just mentioned. It's amazing, to go with Nick and then, help him to really boost his brand and the recognition and to go always to New York to ring the bell. I mean, come on, that's pretty amazing. So
I've threatened to kill him quite a lot, just so you know.
Well, no, I think that's really good. So that's one of your career highlights, you'd say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think every January, I think 17th it gets reposted on Facebook memories. It's like just reminding everybody of my face is on a billboard in Times Square.
Just in case you didn't see it last year. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. I think I literally put sharing this every year until I die.
I don't blame you. Very proud moment, and well done to you. I think that's really important, and this shows also because it was a time for you where you said it was at a bit of a low point, wasn't it? So it done amazing, I'm sure, for your confidence, for your steam. It's much better to know that actually,
and I think
and look what I've done.
Yeah, and I think that relationship with like Nick as an example is a great one. We'd worked together when I was at a previous agency. He'd always sort of come back to find me when he had various projects, and he sort of came back to, this is the first sort of big one on his own. And, and it was working with somebody that I knew and I trusted, and they knew and they trusted me, and getting some fantastic results. And then, when there have been sort of low points in his career or path, it's been my turn to be the one who's like strong or positive. And so having that kind of like dynamic, I think it actually made me think about that's the core of what I want to do as a freelancer, is that authenticity in that relationship and the ability to threaten to kill somebody and then still have like cuddles and wine like next time we see them.
No, it's cool. You and your threats, I'm telling you. Okay, whoever I refer you on to, I'll just be like, just know she just does empty threats. Okay, great work.
No. I mean, headlocks.
Headlock is quite real, actually. I've got some film about that one. I think that's so funny. So what are your thoughts about the industry as a whole and how it's evolving? What do you think of it at the moment? Because I think it's really interesting the way PR and comms has kind of come on leaps and bounds in some respects.
Yeah. I think the encouraging things are I can see more professionalization of the industry at its core. I think the real challenges, and I've seen this across various projects that I'm working on, is getting and retaining good talent at a junior level that you can mold and bring up. Like the world of work is very different now for someone entering the industry as it was when I went in as sort of the grad trainee route, and you kind of just, you know, you did your time, you know, and then you moved up incrementally. I think, especially with the pandemic, I think there's things like remote or hybrid working, there's that demand for like multifaceted career from an early stage, whereas I sort of had to earn it and build it myself. And I think accommodating those different backgrounds and lived experiences and needs is a really interesting challenge. I think that old dynamic of like the bosses, the overlord and the underlings doesn't ring true anymore. There's still room for experience, but then experience at a senior level used to mean X many years on the clock, these big brands under your belt. Whereas hopefully there's a recognition that we need people at junior level who understand what Web3 means. What's the metaverse? What's it look like when half of your life, if not more, is lived in a digital environment where you're buying Gucci bags that aren't really real, you know, and then trading them,
property,
or your face is an ape or a bear, you know. And so understanding that language and that lived experience, which really, and we talked about digital natives probably like 10 years ago, something new and exciting. It's like, it's not even digital native now. It's like people that can seamlessly go from Web 2 to Web 3 to the real world and back again. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So it's a case of more there's some kind of top down and top up, you know, way of passing on the information. I think that's really important as well. Very important. And I suppose I was going to ask you, well, what would you say are the key lessons that you learned throughout your career, which you would share with other women and men of colour, you know, that you feel like is something that's a good tidbit to know?
I think not being afraid to grasp an opportunity and to make a leap that seems sort of tangential or lateral. You know, for the first one for me is going from like a wish to do journalism to going into like press office and PR, you know, and then to, you know, to jump into the tech world and to really focus on, you know, I've seen the opportunity with Ugly Babies is bringing together all that experience that I've got and thinking about how do I make that a scalable business, because consultancy is time intensive and there is a kind of finite amount of hours that I can contract out, whereas with Ugly Babies I'm trying to build more like a platform, right? So less service led and more product led. So the idea that I can eventually scale that and hopefully sell it for oodles of money. And I think I'm grasping that the need and the kind of unique experience that you can bring to that is really key. And I think that's relevant to people of color as well as, you know, anyone else. But I think I've found that people of color in this industry have sort of lacked some of the, not confidence overall, but I think confidence in that aspect of it, like the embracing the kind of otherness of us, you know. For me, leaning into the tiger mum stereotype, it's a positive one, right? So
that's because you've got a positive one, though. Not everyone's stereotypes necessarily positive. So that's the problem you've got, isn't it? It's like I was reading I organised a event earlier this year. Was it earlier this year? I feel like time has just gone and warped into like nothing at the moment. It's just like it just keeps going and going. I'm like, what day is it today? Right. But I just remember organising this event, and basically they were talking about some of the stereotypes that they had faced, different people of colour, and some of them were like being mistaken for toilet attendants. It's like you can't really lean into that. You know, there's things that there's things that you can't always lean into. But so I'd be like,
and it's 50 quid a pee for you.
Exactly. What I'm gonna do. So it's just one of those ones you're like, okay, right. But no, I get that. I think it's about having the right kind of approach and mindset, and maybe not also rejecting stereotypes and being like, well, actually, I'm not like that. For where it's appropriate for you, you might feel like, I can lean into that and be like, it's not a bad one. I can, use this. But there's ones that are not so, nice and flattering.
And there's also nuances. I can be the ferocious Asian tiger mum, but then I have like friends of mine that be like, if I did similar, I'd be like the angry black woman, and it's like you're doing exactly the same thing. And I totally respect that.
Happens all the time. So you might just be a bit feisty, feisty tiger mum, and then you'll be angry black woman, or if it's the Latino, it's a spicy Latina. It's like, so why is that one angry? That one's spicy. That was, It's like, what's going on? But at the same time, it's like, well, no, you're not angry, just passionate. You might just want to express yourself, and why should you have to have a label? But I feel like that can also potentially silence women of colour, because then they'll be like, well, I don't want to be seen as the angry black woman, or I don't want to be seen as the kind of tiger mum. Or, there's those ones as well. I think it also depends on your background and whether you were encouraged to speak up and what your mindset is about that as well.
And I think that's a key lesson, if I was to give advice, is like silence is deadly. Silence is the gap where this insidious discrimination, racism, harassment happens. So I think it's incumbent on all of us as PR professionals, whatever your background or ethnicity, is to speak out. It doesn't always have to be a row, but it's sometimes as simple as pointing someone's behavior out to them, because actually some of these are like institutionalized. They don't realize, that was inappropriate. I'm sorry, I hadn't realized it would be
seen that way, or taken that way.
And I think education is a key thing. It's like you said, it's an evolution, right? You never go, my old tabloid newspaper editor is probably pushing 70 something now, right? He's not going to be, I remember him getting the first Blackberries and peering over his glasses at it, kind of, and I would have to go up and type his emails after his secretary had gone home. Like, he's not a guy that's going to be digitally native overnight, right? And he's not a guy that's going to understand the tabloid editor language of when you still had topless women in the newspaper. I imagine he's probably quite fearful in this new kind of woke environment.
Absolutely. And there is a different environment for people to navigate completely compared to where it was, even 15 years ago with social media. You can't just say anything these days. You've got,
and it's probably quite terrifying for old guys.
For the old guys, definitely. Because as you mentioned, the one who couldn't really use his BlackBerry, it reminds me of my old director who couldn't switch on his washing machine. His wife went on holiday and he couldn't use washing machine whatsoever. And then I even remember going out with him somewhere to grab something, and he was using his card. And you had to put your pin in.
Was it Rishi Sunak?
He starts shouting it out. What's your pin? He starts shouting out his pin. I was like, no, you can't do that. You've got to tap it in. He's just archaic.
not like Rishi trying to pay for petrol with a contactless card. Not there
for his Kia. Yeah.
He borrowed.
By the way, exactly. So it's interesting. Times are changing, and it is definitely making it a different terrain for us to kind of operate in, I'd say.
And I think if we're coming almost, I wouldn't say we're going bottom up, because we are of mature age now, vintage. I think for the younger people, that it's on them to sort of speak up and engender positive change. And I think, but also to do it, sometimes do it kindly, especially with older people. It's like, well, my mum is like immovable objects. There's certain approaches, and there's nuancing that approach to the audience, which actually is a key comms skill. And I think that's what I'd like to see more of it, because it doesn't always have to be a battle. It can be an ongoing conversation where sometimes you have to repeat yourself, much like when I talk to my mum. Repeat myself all the bloody time to get the point.
But I feel like younger people, some of them are just not here for that, and I don't blame them to an extent, because there's our generation that were used to the whole back and forth thing and calming it down, whereas these ones are a bit more like, well, no, this is what I feel, and why should we have to deal with this? So I kind of get it. I just feel like it's just part of the evolution, and part of that is actually working those awkward bits out, which is I agree, young people should be speaking up, but I feel like sometimes they are a bit scared, because obviously they've got the carrot being dangled, and some of them are worried about losing their jobs. But I've always advised people, if you're not happy, then please find a way out. You can move up, move out, but you just got to make sure you're happy in where you are, and I think that's really important for your mental health.
I think and that, like I said, silence is so dangerous when you think about it, even when you think about it on a geopolitical landscape, when you have some draconian laws being brought in around women's rights in certain areas of the States, if you don't speak up, and activate's the wrong word, but you've got to speak up for people that don't have a voice there, who are silenced.
Absolutely. I think that's very important to kind of recognize as well. And for those young people who may be listening, and understand that your voice is very important, and to definitely use it. Use it to advocate for yourself and where you can for others.
Yeah.
So what would you give advice to young people of colour, particularly who are considering entering the industry?
I think what's going to get you the door in is always going to be kind of authentic passion. So I think, try and find something that excites you, right? And build from there. But also, like, not to be single-minded about it. So it's okay, we start from this passion point, but actually to be this kind of whole holistic being that is eminently employable and likable, like gets comfortable with things that make you uncomfortable. So like whether that's getting to grips with social media or Web3, or understanding what the metaverse is, or old school networking in person, because now we get to see people again. Me and Ebony are gonna have dinner, get our drink on.
Get a drink on, exactly. Last time we did that, it was a really good time as well. So absolutely.
And I remember I was just reached out to an old contact of mine who's at The Economist, and I was asking about the metaverse stuff. I said, I've got a lot of clients in the metaverse and NFT, and I'm getting a pretty sniffy response from most journalists. Like, is that the kind of point of view of The Economist? He's like, yeah, mostly, but try and pick out like a couple of the journalists, and I'm like, they're all on the site, and I'm like, so which of these guys on your website are the kind of most up for fine wine and like general revelry? And I think you're the ones with the sort of exuberant mustaches.
Usually was a little bit creative, quirkiness going on with the fancy.
They look fun. I would like to hang with them.
Yeah, go for those ones. That's so funny. Well, no, I think that's good. I think you're right. Passion is really important for when you enter in this industry, having passion and kind of, being open. I do believe that, even though it's a cliche saying, but life does begin outside of your comfort zone. Yeah. I think that's quite an interesting and important kind of point to kind of take on.
But a passion can make you sort of stand out as well. Like I do some, interviews with junior people, and there's literally a kid who's not done his A-levels yet, who's just really impressed us with his understanding of this very complex industry on the tech side, but also really intelligent, like thinking ahead. He's like, I've heard lots of quite negative reactions to NFTs, for example, and my worry is that I build a career in this, that it makes me unemployable. So but he said it much more articulately than that. And I was
he's thinking about that.
Yeah, it's such an intelligent, sort of mature question. It's immediate makes him stand out to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, that's good. Well, I like that. So last year, because I'm looking to wrap up now, anything you want to share around mindset and, anything about how you manage self-limiting beliefs or any kind of internal mindset work? Because obviously we work for ourselves, we're established parents. There's lots going on. So,
and I think women, I think people of colour, and I think freelancers in general can often suffer from this sort of imposter syndrome, rightly or wrongly. And I think what's really key to that is kind of building this community, building this tribe of people that you can trust, and not all people that are yes men, but people that will be the ones to say, like, this is a mad idea, don't do it, or like you're heading down, you're being led by your emotion and not your rationality, or in some cases you need to be passionate and not rational. So I think kind of having that sounding board that you create, and your safe spaces, I think definitely protecting your mental health. I think I really felt this during the pandemic. It's really key to you being able to perform at your best. I was like approaching burnout with like homeschooling and lockdown and work, etc., and then actively took like a couple of months where I just went to a really low level. I'm like, I'm just going to do like reactive stuff for clients, incoming only, and like build myself up, give myself that permission to reset. And it really did me the world of good, because I came back flying. Last quarter of 2021, I just was my best quarter ever. And I ended that year that best year, and it was like I didn't really actively go out and push it. And they were all old clients and projects coming back, like either with a new project, but the same people. So that kind of circle of trust that I'd built, like my very random sort of Polish niche that I had, because I had one Polish client, and if you do well for them, they introduce you to all their friends as their like friends. Person in the UK who can do PR in English. I would say about the Polish is like they're very hard to get to know, but once you're kind of in, you know, you're in, you're their person. You know, you're there, you get the flowers.
Oh, that's good. Well, that's brilliant. So again, you're talking about making sure you take care of yourself, put your mental health first, and it's okay to kind of stand back and take a moment and have a breather from what you're doing.
Exactly. And like, you know, throw out stuff into the universe, and it mostly comes back to you. Not always. Sometimes it comes back and kicks you in the face or puts you in a headlock. But actually, I'm comfortable with the calm that I put out there, and everybody else can get a hell.
Well, that's great. So, but I suppose my last question for you would be like, looking back on the journey, would you do it all over again?
Absolutely. For all its lows, I've learned something, and all its highs have been a moment to kind of reflect on how far you come. So I wouldn't change it for the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me and sharing some of your journey and lived experiences. It's been really great to hear. I really have enjoyed having a nice chat with you. So thank you so much. This is Fiona Chow speaking with me, Ebony Girl, for the Gems in Comms podcast series special. So thank you. And I will be back with a new series very soon. So stay tuned.
You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Girl.